what is the right gravel bike for you? That's actually a pretty tough question because there is such a variety in the gravel bike category. I find it helpful to think of it as a gravel bike spectrum. It's the difference between this and this. On one end of the spectrum, there is the racing bike, the one meant for going fast. And on the other, there's the bike that's designed for adventure or exploring. We're going to look at features of both of these bikes. And you'll probably notice that the distinctions between racing and exploring, they get a bit blurry at times. But all of this information is going to ultimately help you find the right bike for the riding that you plan to do. Let's start with a gravel bike's frame and geometry. This is a Trek Checkmate. It's made to race. The frame is carbon fiber. It's one of the company's highest grades of the composite. So that makes the bike light and stiff. Also, you'll notice the tube shapes are designed for cutting through the wind. So right away, you probably noticed that there's a lot of similarities between this gravel bike and a high-end road bike. That's the lightweight and the aerodynamics. The bike puts you in a very aggressive position. So that's low, again, for cutting through the wind and to help you get a really powerful pedal stroke. Handling on this race bike, it's pretty quick, agile, and responsive. This Trek Checkpoint is a gravel bike designed for exploring. Its geometry puts you in a more upright position, which will keep you comfortable over the long haul. Now this Checkpoint is the same size as the Checkmate. They're both size medium. But if you take a look at the stem length, this bike, the Checkpoint, its stem is smaller by about 20 millimeters. So that also helps to put you in a more upright position. Another difference in geometry is at the chainstays and at the wheelbase. Both of these figures are slightly longer. So by having slightly longer chainstays and ultimately a slightly longer wheelbase, you get a ride that's more planted and stable. Now, the tube shapes on this bike are not necessarily optimized for aero gains, but that actually opens up some other options, which I'll show you in a bit. An important consideration for any gravel bike is tire clearance. The fork and the frame itself affects how wide of a tire you can run. Actually, the drivetrain can also have an effect there too. A front derailleur may cut down a few millimeters of tire clearance at the back. This race bike has clearance for 45 millimeters. Now, up until about this year, I would have said 45 millimeters is plenty, except for maybe the really, really chunky stuff in a race. However, there are pros who have been running much wider, around 53 millimeters. Aside from these gee-whiz setups, I think 45 millimeters still gives you a very good range of options for fast courses that you might face. An adventure bike like this one has clearance for tires as wide as 50 millimeters. Now with all of that rubber, that increases your traction, your control, and your comfort. Now both of these bikes that we've looked at are designed around 700C wheels. On some gravel bikes, you can run 650B diameter wheels. So those are slightly smaller, but with that, then you're able to have slightly wider tires. Usually bikes that are designed to go between different wheel sizes have a flip chip or some means of accommodating not only the wheels, but also keeping the handling mostly consistent. Then there are bikes that maybe weren't designed for the swap, but it is still possible to do it. In these cases, you are very likely going to notice a change in the handling. So keep that in mind. And remember, with tire clearance, always check that the tires you have will actually, in fact, work with your frame and fork. The spec might say it works, but once you put those treads on the wheels themselves and fit it in the bike, you should double check that there's enough clearance. And also think about the routes you're taking on. If it's a lot of mud, you're gonna need to make sure there's some extra space so that mud can clear and not scrape your brand new gravel bike frame. This race bike comes with the latest in gravel gearing. It's got a 13 cog cassette. There's a 10-tooth cog all the way up to a 46-tooth cog. What I like about it is the progression that you have when going from cog to cog. The jumps are not so big, and that's important for your cadence, which you want to keep efficient no matter what the terrain is doing on the race course. This adventure bike comes with pretty standard gravel gearing. It has a 12-speed cassette at the back. In comparison with the 13-speed on the race bike, the jumps between cogs here are a bit bigger, but I don't find on really varied terrain when exploration is the goal that these jumps between cog sizes are that much of an issue. One thing to consider though, if your terrain is really extreme, then you're going to be wanting to look for a bigger range in your cog sizes on your cassette. If on your adventure gravel bike, you're going to go out on a multi-day bike packing trip, you're going to need storage options. This Trek Checkpoint has storage options in spades. There's mounts all over the place, including on the front fork. The handlebars are fairly wide on this bike, which not only give you a lot of control on descents, but it also gives you a bit of space for a handlebar bag. Oh, and check this out. This bike has some built-in storage right here on the down tube. Storage is also a consideration for a race bike, especially if you're taking on an event that's 200 miles. This race bike can run a top tube bag easily. You can also throw in a triangle bag within the frame. Lots of options for bottle cages, even down by the bottom bracket. The fork, however, doesn't have any mounts. You could put on a handlebar bag, but there's nothing aero about a handlebar bag. If you are a rider who needs a small or extra small frame, you need to look really carefully at your storage options. Neither of these bikes in small or extra small can run a frame bag officially. These two bikes are size medium, and I find with certain bag and bottle combinations, I need a side load bottle cage just to make things work. Large and extra large riders, you're in luck. You can fit tons of stuff in the space in your frames. Because a race bike is a purpose-built machine, you're going to find making certain modifications difficult or not possible at all. For example, on this race bike, you cannot put on a suspension fork at the front. Or over here at the seat post, you cannot put in a dropper post. You could take out the one-piece bar and stem and put in a more traditional stem and bar setup. But if that's what you want to do, I'd say this probably isn't the bike for you. This is optimized for aero gains. If you want more versatility, then you probably want to look at the adventure bike. For example, on this one, there's a standard stem and handlebar that you could swap out if you want something more specific. The seat post can be removed and you can put in a dropper post for getting the saddle out of the way on steep descents. Over at the front, you can run a suspension fork with as much as 40 millimeters of travel. Now, 40 millimeters might not seem like a lot, even compared with 100 millimeters on a cross-country bike, but that extra bit of travel in the front will give you heaps of control compared with a rigid fork. So let's return to the question of what is the right gravel bike for you? If you want to race, then quite simply, you should look to features that prioritize speed. If exploration and adventure are your thing, then versatility is what you want to see in a frame or a bike. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, the distinctions between racing and exploring can get a little blurry. Take our race bike, for example. Can you put on a seat bag and maybe do a little light bike packing with it? Sure, why not? And the adventure bike, can you race it? Definitely you can. So then, how can you decide, even with all this blurriness? Well, I think you should start with, where are you going to be riding for the most part? Are you, say, a weekend rider who wants to take on lots of twisty trails and maybe, just maybe one day you're gonna do Unbound? Well, if that's the case, I would suggest a more adventure-oriented bike. But maybe you're a roadie who likes going really fast, but you want to mix it up with some different surfaces that, add a bit more variety to your routes. Then in that case, I think the race bike is the way to go. Your perfect gravel bike is out there, and I hope I was able to help you on your search.